It's time for the Postmortem Report with your hosts Ronald McGilvray and Michael Schotter. Each month, these sultans of speculative fiction take a break from bending reality to ask one burning question. What cool stuff got buried in the social media graveyard while people were busy yelling at each other? Well, there's only one way to find out, so let's dig into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Postmortem Report. I'm your co-host, Michael Schotter.
And I'm Ronald McGilvray. Welcome to episode 9.
9 it is.
Yes, almost 10, which is 1 after 9.
Creeping up on double digits. We're creeping up on it.
I know.
It's pretty exciting.
It certainly is. Anything new or exciting?
Oh, well, I'm currently acclimating myself to my new habitat. So if things sound a little different, if things look a little different, that's what's up with that. I'm in a new office space. So it's different. Yeah. Let's go with different.
But you're enjoying your new digs?
Yeah, it's been good times. It's been good times for sure. Got to fiddle around with some things, kind of move some things around, try some stuff that I didn't really have space for, the way the other room was configured. So yeah, I think there'll be a little experimentation over the next couple of weeks and months as I kind of get this new setup dialed in, but so far so good.
Perfect. Me, I'm exactly the same.
The beacon of consistency.
Exactly. I haven't left this seat actually since last episode.
Oh.
I've just been sitting here waiting for the next one.
Well, at least you changed your shirt.
Yeah, I had my assistant bring me my outfit.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, so you got that check.
Yeah.
Nice.
Now that we're making the big bucks, I got an assistant. She's back there just holding stuff for me. So when I'm looking for my notes,
that's good.
They just hold it. So yeah, I'm all set to go.
We want to make sure we're all squared away. We don't want any discrepancies in the big bag of money. Good times.
Yes, sir.
So, speaking of discrepancies, actually, I got nothing for this. Let's do birthdays.
All right, let's do it. I'll get my assistant just to come over here and hold that little flip chart for me, and we'll get going. So these are our birthdays for episode 9. So if you've missed these birthdays in the past, this is your chance to go and say happy birthday. We'll start off with our first one, David North Martino, February 5th. He was the author of Wolves of Vengeance and also a martial arts enthusiast. He has actually some videos that he shows his stuff and he uses swords and other kind of weaponry. So not the kind of guy you'd want to mug or spar with unless you want to lose a hand or something.
Yeah, it seems like that would just be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, he's also actually the co-host for the House of Mystery. So it's people have been watching that. That's a good show to watch. So happy birthday, David. Hope you had a great one. Next on our list is Denver Grenell. His birthday was February 9th, author of Red Ruin. He just got a good review on Critical Blast.
Nice. Yeah, I was checking that site out, and it seems like a pretty cool little like media focused site. Like they seem to talk about a bunch of different stuff on there in different mediums.
And I guess I should add, Michael has nothing to do if I mispronounce any of the names. I apologize on my birthday wishes. If I mispronounce your name, give me a shout out and I will correct it live. But the thought is there and it's all my fault, not Michael's.
Oh, have I been getting thrown under the bus?
No one's actually said anything yet, but in case I get it wrong, I thought I'd mention that.
Nice.
Next on our list is James G. Carlson. His birthday was February 11th. Author of Midnight in the City of the Carrion Kid. it's actually gotten some great reviews. I actually saw one. Leslie from the Nerdy Narrative was talking about the book. So that's another book you'd want to check out. So happy birthday to James. Justin Boote, February 12th, author of Hunting Demons with D&T Publishing. It was a D&T Publishing post I saw it on. So happy birthday to Justin. And actually, there's a perfect example. Justin Boote, it has an E at the end. That's what was making me think when I was go. And it's like, oh, I got it wrong. It was actually, it's Boote.
Yeah.
But yeah. I don't think so. But I wish you all the best for your birthday.
Are we going back to like the white ibis situation again?
No, it's not that quite bad. Now I'm just covering my my butt on the situation in case I get anyone's name wrong.
Nice.
So yeah. It's Chad Lutzke's birthday was February 13th. Author of 3 Mile Smile. He's also a great book cover artist. He puts some of his stuff up. I've seen some of his stuff. It looks good.
Yeah, Chad's moving into the thriller genre, it seems like, lately. From what I've heard or what I understand, I think that's kind of his thing now, which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, everyone's got to grow, expand your horizons. So good luck to Chad, and happy birthday. Mark Matthews, birthday February 25th, author of The Hobgoblin of the Little Mines. So happy birthday to Mark. Hope you had a good one. Lynne Hansen, February 26th, was her birthday. Another really great cover artist. Her work is pretty spectacular. She does a lot of course, Jeff Strand's books, but a lot of other stuff. I on her mailing list, so I get these monthly calendars that she does, and she does some incredible work.
Some of which has been shown here on previous episodes, so go back and watch those.
Yeah, well, I saw the latest was Firefly Rain by Richard Dansky. It was a pretty spectacular cover. So congratulations to Richard on having a fine cover by Lynne. So happy birthday, Lynne. And Kevin Lucia, February 28th, author of The Horror at Pleasant Brook. If you missed his birthday, get on it. Buy his book. So nice. Happy birthday to Kevin, and to everyone we mentioned. We hope you had a great birthday in February. And that wraps up our birthday wishes.
Well, I'm really pleased to see that you didn't prank anybody for their birthday, because that would have just been mean-spirited. And I know the temptation was there, right? Because April Fool's is coming up.
Yes, but I've learned that you do it, then people reciprocate. So I'm just an angel now, because who needs to be pranked?
That's wise. That's very wise. But, we've seen a few things floating around on the internet that are maybe not so wise from a marketing standpoint. Why don't you guys have a look at this, and you can be the judge.
Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Richard Bartram, Vice President Communications for WestJet, here with some exciting news. Effective today, we're introducing child-free cabins on board select flights. We've heard from many of our guests that they're tired of kids screaming and running up and down the aisle, and are looking, quite simply, for some peace and quiet. So, you may be asking, how do I get my children to their destination? Well, that's a great question, and we've got a great answer. We call it Cargo Kids. Let's take a look at the process. When you arrive at the airport, simply ask for Cargo Kids when you check in. Our friendly WestJet customer service agents are more than happy to help. They'll assist you in getting your child ready for their trip on the travel toboggan. Your child will be whisked away on a magic carpet ride, and your work is done. Meanwhile, our WestJetters are hard at work. Your child's toboggan will arrive safely with the luggage and other kids who will be boarding that flight. From there, one of our friendly WestJetters will take the children to their waiting flight. On board each flight, we have a Cargo Kids counselor who's there to make sure that your kids are well taken care of and supervised. With plenty of toys and a state-of-the-art feed trough, your children will be able to run, play, scream, and eat all they want, while you enjoy your flight in peace and quiet. So book Cargo Kids today by going to westjet.com/cargokids. That's cargo and kids with a K. And let us give you the peace and quiet you need. From all of us at WestJet, you're welcome.
Happy April Fools from WestJet.
Look for your savings below.
All right, so now that we're done fooling around, let's get on to something a bit more serious, because you, my friend, just read a book that seemed to me as though it was going to be pretty serious business.
Yes, it was. And it was a great read. It was Alive and Dead by Brian Bowyer. If you like vampires, vampire kids that are twins, serial killers, musicians, I've got the book for you, because this one contains all of those.
That's an oddly specific set of check boxes, but I can dig it. Let's delve into this a bit deeper.
Yeah, it's self-proclaimed his sort of tightest, leanest, minimalist book yet. He just cut the fat from the bone. It flies by. It's something else. You really have to experience it. Now, of course, I've liked everything I've read by Brian, so I'm really into the style of the way he writes. But this one, it follows a bunch of different characters. There's this couple, like a young sort of teenage couple, that sort of start. Well, there's no one actually really good in this. I was trying to think of someone who was good.
Someone to root for.
Yeah. Well, you can root for them, but they all do bad things. But there's kind of a musical. The characters sort of they want to be musicians, and they come across. There's also like a priest who's a pedophile. Actually, I don't know how I forgot about that one. There's a lot going on in this
You'd think
book.
that would stand out, but
yeah. But there's these twins, and I'm trying to think in my head, make sure I don't do anything to spoil anything for those who haven't read it yet. These twins,
yes,
and they're
careful.
vampires, and they're sort of finding their real father and making friends who are human. And then you have the another sort of part of the story where you have a young woman that wants to become a musician and a singer, and then there's the priest who is sort of a serial pedophile out on the hunt for victims. And then you have a serial killer who's also on the hunt just to kill. And then you have two, I guess you'd say, seasoned vampires. And all of these people, eventually all their worlds collide.
Mm-hmm.
And not really to the betterment of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what's interesting is everyone seems to be like a ruthless killer, but there's like a spark of humanity in them as well. And it's for such a sort of a lean written book, it's also very complex.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. It shows, someone that even the most heartless, cruel killer can show some kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, affection toward someone that they decide they're gonna like, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, and it's interesting how everything kind of weaves together. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know myself, I tend to gravitate more towards stories that have more nuanced characters. I'm not really one for the stereotype or the like hard archetype when it comes
Yeah,
to like a character. Like, I always use the analogy of like the mustache twirling villain, right? Where it's like somebody who's just so unequivocally awful
yeah,
that they just become like sort of one dimensional or one note. Like
yeah,
I'm glad to hear that even though this is a kind of a leaner, tighter project, he's still not forsaking, nuance or depth in the characters. That's good
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. It was a really, I really liked this read.
Yeah.
It was
It
clever.
seems as though, from from your description of it and from kind of your reaction to it, that like despite it being sort of different from other stuff that he's done, it's still sort of capturing his voice and his style pretty
Yeah,
effectively. It's not like as if somebody else wrote it, right?
yeah, yeah. It's still got his sort of trademark sort of blistering pace. It's just like, oh, it's matter of fact stuff. It's just, and the kills are just, and it doesn't go into like where some are, when you're reading the books are so graphic in the deaths, especially in sort of the horror genre. There's not a
Mm-hmm.
lot of I think it's the cold matter of factness
Mm-hmm.
that the way he writes. It's not the, he dissected them and pulled out, entrails. It's the shocking deaths that he managed to pull off that always kind of
Nice.
intrigues me. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, I know, and I mean the thing is, right, like if you're an imaginative person, it doesn't take a lot of prodding to get your brain to go to those places on its own, right?
yeah,
Like, so if you, if I know a lot of people like, the gory details, for lack of a
yeah,
better term, in their reading, but I know myself, I tend to lean towards things that are more provocative, or more like I'm just going to nudge you in this direction and kind of let you run wild with it yourself and kind
yeah.
of go there yourself in terms of the details of what occurs. I think sometimes that can actually be more horrifying or terrifying or unsettling. Um, but your mileage may vary. It all depends on what you're into. But it seems
By
like
the
seems like a cool approach for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's definitely found his voice, because I can pick up a book, and if it's a Brian Boyer book, I as soon as I read it, I recognize his writing, even if he didn't have his name on the cover. I'd be
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I'm 100% sure this is a Brian Boyer book.
Yeah,
So
nice,
you know, it's
nice.
uh, it's always something to accomplish when you have your own voice, your own style that people will
Mm-hmm.
recognize.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so congratulations to Brian on a fine book. Everyone should pick it up.
Excellent.
How about you? Do you have anything read this month?
Well, speaking of people with distinct voices, distinct literary voices, I was actually going to go back to the vault again this month because I have
Okay.
been very busy with new projects and stuff pretty much for the past several months. And while that hopefully will be coming to an end shortly, and I'll be able to start picking up and reading some new things, I thought I would go back in time one more time here and talk about a classic science fiction book from my youth.
All righty.
So this is a book called Falling Free by Lois McMaster Bujold. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that particular author, she's pretty famous and pretty like revered within the science fiction writing community. She's been at it for a super long time, has a very long running and like beloved series of books called the Vorkosigan Saga, which this book Falling Free is a part of. And we've talked in the past on the show about sort of things that make a big impression on you and have a big impact on you and sort of resonate with you years and years after you first experience them.
Yeah.
And for me, this book is definitely one of those things, right? Like if I had to make a short list of books that I read, when I was younger that really stuck with me and had a big impact and like resonated with me all throughout my life from that point forward, this is definitely one of them. So I definitely wanted to talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
So the basic premise of this book is that there's this fella named Leo Graff, who's an engineer working on a space station around another planet in the future. And he gets brought in to work with these beings called quaddies. And what they essentially are is these people who have been genetically engineered and specifically created to work in space. And so the thing that gives them their unique moniker is the fact that as opposed to having 2 arms and 2 legs as a normal human would, they in fact have 4 arms. So they basically have another set of arms where their legs would normally be on a normal human being. And because these people have been essentially created, by the corporation that took them and manufactured them, essentially, they basically have no rights. They're basically just tools or chattel or fodder for this corporation.
Right.
And Leo, of course, being the hero of the story and the main protagonist, when he comes into this environment and sees what's going on with these people and starts to actually see them as people as opposed to machinery, a lot of things ensue. And obviously I'm not going to spoil the book. People should definitely go read the book because it is a classic and very beloved. But it's just one of those things like where when you talk about like a book that like I think for the right reader could really hit them, in a lot of different ways. Like there's a lot of different things that book does better, I think, than most other books that tread the same ground that I've read. And it also, of course, has the virtue of being a fairly old book, so it sort of predates a lot of other things you might be familiar with that kind of tread similar ground. But things that for me that really stood out about it and still are things that I think about a lot are just how like deep and fleshed out and sophisticated Leo is as a main character, which really makes a lot of sense because it turns out that the author actually modeled him after her own father, who was also an engineer. And so you can really see that in like the way she brings that character to life and like imbues him with a lot of like really cool depth and detail and backstory and stuff like that, which is obviously drawn from her own life experience with her dad. And then again, just the way that she examines a lot of really deep, profound, philosophical and moral issues in that book in a way that's very deft and adept without being too heavy-handed and too like in your face about it, I think is something that a lot of people could take notes from. And that's I guess the other main thing I'd say about it. So
it kind of sounded like reminded me of sort of Blade Runner a bit.
Yeah, I think you could definitely say there's maybe some comparisons between the way the quaddies are perceived and treated and thought of and the way the synths are in Blade Runner, for sure.
Now, are the quaddies, you said they have the 4 arms. Now, where the legs are, so does that mean they don't have any legs?
They have no legs, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
so use the
instead
arms
of legs,
to walk.
they have the 2 additional arms. Yeah. And they've also been sort of engineered to function better in low gravity, so they're very susceptible to like normal gravity or anything like even approaching like normal Earth gravity is like painful to them, right? Like they're meant to be out in space, like in 0G. And so like that's another facet of the story, right, is how they're very much sort of tailored to their environment and very much out of their element in a normal environment that would be pleasant for humans to be in.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So if you're into the classics, if you're into going back to the vault and going back and kind of reading things that have been the inspiration for a lot of more modern things. I think Falling Free is a book you should probably check out, especially if you're at all interested in science fiction.
You mentioned it's part of a series.
Yeah, the Vorkosigan saga.
So are
and
these
actually
quaddies
what's
throughout?
that?
The quaddies, are they throughout the series?
So there
or
is
that just
another book that features them, which I'll throw it up on the screen, that is set several hundred years beyond the events of Falling Free. But the interesting thing about Falling Free is, despite being part of the Vorkosigan saga, it's actually sort of somewhat detached from it. So it takes place in the same universe, and there's a lot of like common themes and common little bits of information, but it's almost like you could almost read it as a standalone. So I think even though it's like the fourth or fifth book in that quote unquote series, it really does stand on its own. Like you don't have to have read any of the others to like get what it is delivering. So that's definitely one thing that's worth mentioning about it for sure, is it does definitely stand on its own. Yeah, so good times.
Yes. Nothing more fun than reading books.
Mm-hmm. I would say at best there are things that are equally fun.
Please do tell.
Podcasts and like audio programs and stuff like that, which we haven't really delved into too recently, but I think you have a few that you wanted to touch on this time around.
Yeah, I decided to take a break from audiobooks and get back to some podcasts, and had a few good ones this month. Paper Cuts Live with Jay and Brad had another good episode. This one with Tim McGregor, author of Wasps in the Ice Cream. Tim is a fellow Canadian. He used to be, he was a screenwriter at one time, and now he's writing books. He decided that, why collaborate when you can do it on your own?
Nice.
So good on him. So Wasps in the Ice Cream is sort of a coming of age. This boy meets a girl, and the girl's a witch, as is her family, and I guess he sort of has a double life where his friends are pitted against the girl and her family, who they, I guess, see as witches and evil. So
aren't really down with the witchcraft.
No, I guess not.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a good feature on Tim. As always, Jay and Brad do a good job getting authors out there and their names out there.
Yeah, very nice. I've seen that book pop up quite a few times. It's definitely got one of those covers that kind of sticks in your head, right? Like I from the very first time I saw it, I'm like, I'm not going to forget that cover anytime soon.
Yeah, no, it's a sharp looking cover.
Yeah, for sure.
Another one was Silent Hill Radio, which is starting to become a real standby for me. That's like when I want a 30-minute short nostalgic story. They do a really good job, the ones that they put up. But this one in particular was interesting because it was The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And although I'd read it back in the day, I've never heard it or seen any kind of teleplay on it. So it was really interesting to hear it sort of play out as sort of a radio play. And it was good. You're familiar with, I shouldn't say obviously, because that's condescending, but you're familiar with The Lottery.
Yeah, I've experienced it in a few different forms. I've actually heard a few audio renditions of it over the years myself. So I'd definitely be curious to see how theirs compares with the ones I have heard. But that's definitely, like, we were talking before about classics. That's, to me, definitely a sort of foundational kind of classic story that I think people who are interested in that sort of thing probably should check out if they haven't.
Yeah. Well, Silent Hill Radio does a really good job, and I like it too that it's sort of based on shorter stories that are played out. And so if, you have, half an hour, it's not something you have to, listen to an hour and a half or like 6 to 10 hours of audiobook kind of thing. You get like a full fleshed out story, and it's fun. As I said, it's starting to become one of my go-to podcasts. So Silent Hill Radio, if you haven't checked it out yet, do so. Tell them Ron sent you. Yeah. Nice. And actually, something new from Steve Talks Books. Not only does he talk books, but now Steve talks movies. So if you didn't know that, you should catch that. So people who are fans of Steve Talk Books, his new venture, Steve Talks Movies, is out. I just watched him talking about Train to Busan.
I was going to say, I feel like that's a good thing to have early in your repertoire, because that movie seems to get a lot of love online. A lot of people seem to be super into it. So I would think that would attract a lot of potential viewers.
Yeah. A lot of people think that movie is like the best zombie movie, like the number one. I don't really concur with that, but it is very good. It's one of my top ones.
Yeah, I definitely understand the love for it, for sure. Yeah. I just wish the people who made it weren't quite so litigious when it comes to like people talking about that movie and showing clips and stuff from it, because they seem to be very like anti that, which is ironic because it's so it seems to be so popular online despite all that. But yeah, from what I know of that movie and what I've seen of it, it definitely seems to have earned that reputation that it has.
So everyone out there, if you haven't gone over to check out Steve Talks Movies, you should do that, because he has a whole pile of other movies he talks to. He just sits there and he talks to the movies.
Sometimes you get lonely.
Yeah.
You got to do what you got to do.
Exactly. So so check out Steve Talk Movies. It's maybe you'll just find your next favorite movie on his show.
Swank.
Yep, those are my podcasts for this month.
Right. Well, speaking of movies, we have a couple to talk about that we have recently watched. You wanna let the people know about this first one?
Sure. This one will have a disclaimer, because I don't know if even talking about it may cause your death.
Yes,
and it's called.
We should warn the people.
Yeah, so if you're, the possibilities there, and it's called Antrum, the deadliest film ever made. Actually, I saw a post by Madison McSweeney on it, and I was going, I wanted to watch that once, so I hunted it down and watched it, and it was certainly different. It's not found footage. It's it's like found movie. Like they found a movie that was made. I can't actually remember where it was. It was like Hungary or Prague or somewhere. And the beginning of the movie is kind of like a mockumentary of people. They found the film and they talk about the history of the film and sort of the possible curse, where people who, I guess the very first premiere, everyone died in the theater house and were trampled. And then a few people, I guess, premiere, movie viewers who check out who they're going to pick, people who actually saw the film also died. So it was like, if you watch it, there's a good chance you're going to die. So they go through the whole sort of mockumentary part of that. And then they
establishing the mythos. Yeah.
And then they actually show the film. And then, because I thought, well, they were going to show like clips from, but then after they show how the whole film was. And that part, it was different. It was just, it had that 70s feel,
Yeah.
like kind of same grainy Texas Chainsaw Massacre 70s. Because I mean, growing up in the 70s too, like when I saw it film, I had such a visceral feeling, because it was like I know there's certain looks. I'm like, oh, that's bringing me back to those kind of films.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
It's just basically watching these young brother and sister who lost a pet, trying to save its soul by digging a hole to hell. Probably not the best idea to begin with.
Yeah. I definitely appreciated all the effort that was put into trying to make that idea make sense from a like sort of logistical standpoint. And like, actually, I was really surprised, without going into spoiler territory, about how all that aspect of it ended up resolving, because I actually thought that was kind of like a cool little twist, for lack of a better term, because when things first start out, you kind of think like things are going in one direction, and then it becomes very apparent that they're actually going in a very different direction. And I actually kind of liked that. I thought that was pretty neat. But like, the thing about the actual film itself, right, is that it's definitely got that like very slow, methodical, like almost trudging pace that like you would have expected from like a horror film or a thriller film from that era. And so I would say like the film itself is definitely like a bit of a slow burn, right? Like it took probably about like a third or a halfway into it before I was like even remotely invested in what was going on, and thinking anything beyond, man, this is really cheesy and not so great. But then it kind of comes out swinging in that last half, to the point where I was actually pretty engaged and pretty interested in the actual like found film part of it. And then of course, once that's finished, the sort of little chaser at the end where they have all the extra interviews with people talking about it, and the little sort of hints or things that they imply at that point after you've seen the film, was very cool. Like it kind of put a nice like capper on everything. So I thought like the whole effect and like the whole overall package of it worked really well. But I guess I would say like my one caveat in like recommending it to people would be, go into like the actual found film part of it, understanding that it's a slow burn, right? Like it's not, the payoff doesn't come until you're like pretty deep into it.
But even for me, I get, at the beginning, although not a lot was happening, it just had that creep factor.
That like, uneasy creepiness.
The way they throw those random images up is like unsettling in a way.
For sure.
You're just like, what is this? It's like it's a mind trip kind of thing. Wasn't the word I was going to use, but
I think we all
public
know the word
access
you were going to use.
It was so I mean, I was actually engaged, even though it wasn't really action filled. I was like, what? And it's just I kept saying what, and then you almost wanted to rewind it to go, what was that, and stop frame, because some things just came up for like a brief frame, and you knew something weird, but you weren't sure. But I thought it was an interesting film. I didn't know what to expect, but
I would definitely agree. I definitely don't regret watching it, that's for sure. And thought it actually came together really nicely. I just kind of threw that caveat out there more so for like, I know a lot of people kind of want like an immediate sort of hook or an immediate sort of payoff with some of these things. And I feel like this is a good example of one that like, it may not grab you right away, depending on what your expectations are going into it. But I feel like I said before, I feel like the payoff is pretty solid and the payoff is pretty good.
There's
So,
no Iron Man or Thor in this
Yeah.
one. It's not an Avenger movie. So
yeah. Well, and I think it just goes to show, right, how stylistically different filmmaking today, or even like 10 or 20 years ago, is versus how films were made back in the 70s. Because that, like you say, that film just oozes 70s culture
Yeah.
and nostalgia and style.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, they got that down,
Yeah.
really well. So
Yeah.
it was, and both of us have survived.
Yeah, we're still here. Yeah.
So, for people who are afraid to watch it, we managed to survive. So we're pretty sure you will as well. But that was an interesting kind of concept too. It's like, if you watch it, and they kind of sort of push that too at the beginning.
I was really glad that they mentioned the ring and cigarette burns and other things like that, and kind of acknowledged that this isn't like a new concept necessarily. Like, I thought that was a good little like tip of the hat and acknowledgement of those existing films. And so that I really appreciated that. I felt like they were, because I feel like a lot of times people will just sort of ignore the fact that they're maybe not the first to the block with an idea. And I just thought it was cool of them to like, throw that in there and like let it be known that they knew, that what they were doing was in a similar vein to something that had been done previously.
Yeah. Did you think about pausing when the sort of, because they had that sort of, I can't think of what you'd call it, like the written disclaimer at the beginning about you're about to start watching it. Did you ever think
I thought it was funny that they literally put the timer on the screen, right? So there's like the timer counting down to like give you every opportunity to stop watching before it actually proceeds. I thought that was another nice touch, because that in its own way kind of built up a little bit of tension. And at first I was like, are they going to just be jerks about it and throw like a jump scare right at the end of the timer? And then as soon as they didn't do that, I was like, okay, I see what you're doing here. This is more subtle, right? This is more nuanced than that. And that actually helped kind of hook me into it, because I feel like had they just gone for the cheap scare or whatever at the beginning, I would have been like less inclined to proceed. So that was good for sure.
It's definitely something different. If you're looking for something different, it's right up your alley. So I think people should check it out. And it's on Tubi, so it's free. You got to put up with a commercial, and I don't even think there was that many commercials either. So it wasn't all that bad.
It was definitely funny when I watched it, where the places where some of the commercials got inserted were very like funny for me. I don't know if you noticed that in your watch, but like it would just be like in the middle of some like crazy moment or whatever, and then it would just cut to commercial.
Yeah.
Which I guess that would be something I would say is, if you have the opportunity to watch it without commercials, definitely take it, because I feel like that is one thing the commercials did kind of like break up the tension a little bit and break up the sort of immersion. And I think like maybe if you watch that film without commercials, it might be even more engaging and immersive. Yeah.
So something to check out. How about you?
Well, something else to check out, because whenever you mentioned this film to me, it kind of got me thinking about sort of gimmick films, right? Like films that basically have like a premise, and then everything's sort of built around that premise, which I think Antrum kind of falls into that category. And that immediately got me thinking about another film I had seen recently called Meander, which is kind of in the vein of the whole like puzzle maze movie. So it's things like Cube or The Circle or The Platform, things of that sort, where there's basically like a gimmick or a premise that gets established very early in the film, and then you kind of spend the rest of the film seeing how that plays out, or seeing how people negotiate or deal with that premise. But I know you got a chance to check this one out. What did you think of it?
It was no Cube. But I mean, I enjoyed it overall. It was well, I guess it has sort of that European flavor to it.
Yeah, it's a French film.
Yeah, it's kind of I wouldn't say artsy, because it wasn't artsy, but it had that pseudo artsy feel, like they were trying to, some stuff would just kind of, not that it didn't make sense, but it was for
There's a lot of
look,
stylistic
cinema. Yes,
it.
It was the cinematography is more important than the story. I think what we discussed a bit earlier, where for me at the beginning, I guess without spoiling anything, I mean, the basic premise is this woman finds herself in this maze of sorts. And
well, let's rewind a little bit, right? Because I think we can go back even further, right? So at the beginning of the movie, she's literally just laying in the middle of the road looking up at the sky, right? And so this fella comes along and picks her up, because as his truck approaches, she like gets up off the road and he pulls up to her and basically is like, hey, you need a ride. And so she gets in, because as one does, right? Just
when you're lying in the middle of the road waiting to get killed.
Yeah. Clearly not very interested in self-preservation. And gets into the car with the guy, and then quickly comes to find that the guy may not have been the best guy to get into a car with. And then chaos ensues, and she gets basically knocked out. And when she wakes up, she finds herself in this sort of rat maze, right? This trap, basically, that she's been put into. And then it's sort of from that initial premise, her kind of figuring out what's going on with that, and whether or not she even wants to escape from it.
Yeah,
which is another sort of aspect to the movie that I found interesting, because I feel like they very much communicate very early on that she's not in the best like sort of mental or emotional state to begin with. And then so being put into this situation on top of that is not going well for her.
Well, as we talked a bit about, I just found it she had no urgency. That was one thing that kind of bothered me a bit about it. It's like, you're in a tunnel and a door opens, I'd be scurrying, through those things trying to get to the other end. But she didn't seem to be in any kind of, thing. And plus, her wrist thing has a timer on it, which I'd be like, well, that's not good. That must mean something. I'm going to try to hustle. But she's like looking at it, 10 minutes, dum-da-dum-da-dum, through that sort of tunnel. And I was kind of like, all right.
See how I kind of interpreted that, and this isn't really heavy spoiler stuff, because this all happens within the first few minutes of the movie. But how I kind of interpreted that was that like she was concerned about what might happen if she went down the tunnel too quickly, right? There's like, okay, I have no idea where I am. I have no idea what's happening to me. What's going to happen if I go down this tunnel? And so I kind of interpreted that reluctance as caution more so than apathy. But I guess I could see how you could spin that either way, for sure. But even if it is apathy, I think that sort of plays into the whole thing that's established with her character fairly early on, which is that like she's clearly not in a good way, right? She's clearly borderline suicidal to be like laying there in the middle of the road in the first place. And so I think like that probably, I think either way you spin it, I feel like that kind of worked for me, in terms of like either she's cautious or she's apathetic, based on her circumstances. But I think for me, the thing that really ended up working about the movie is kind of where it goes from there, because once things kind of get going and she kind of, uncovers more of what's actually going on and like starts having more interactions with the environment and other things start happening. And then the sort of layers of what's actually going on get peeled away, which of course we can't talk about because that is spoiler territory.
Yeah.
I felt like it was another one of those ones where to me it was like sort of a slow burn where like it started out kind of and then by the end I was kind of into it and kind of invested in it and thought it like wrapped up in an interesting, somewhat unexpected way. So that would be for me the reason why I would recommend that movie. But again, your mileage may vary.
It's worth a watch. I certainly didn't like it. I found, as I said at the beginning, I was kind of like, all right, how long is it going to take for her to get through this tunnel? Let's speed it up. Speed it up.
Chop. We got places to go. We got people to see. Make this happen.
Things do speed up, though.
Well, the French can be rather lethargic before they get their coffee and croissant in the morning.
I guess
so
maybe
that might just be how they roll.
After a night of lying in the middle of the road.
Yeah, after a long night of lying in the middle of the road, you might be a little pokey.
Yeah. They gave her a nice swanky outfit, though.
Yeah. Again, kind of talking about the stylistic elements of the film, I did think that was one thing that it definitely did have going for it. Like I appreciated and enjoyed like some of the more stylistic things that were done in terms of like the set design and the way things were shot and costuming and stuff like that. Like I thought it had a cool, like noteworthy, distinct look to it. Like I feel like it stood out. It didn't feel like generic to me, which is another thing I would say I thought was noteworthy about it.
Well, they had interesting use of colors. They had different colors for different things, and then there was that sort of the womb like scene.
Yeah. That was pretty cool, like just from an aesthetics standpoint. And especially being different than the environments you had seen up to that point, right? Like the contrast of that was pretty cool. But so cautious recommendation maybe on that one.
It's I mean, if you like Cube, it's something to watch and compare.
Yeah, I don't think I would necessarily put that movie up against Cube, but I think it's also really hard to talk about that movie without mentioning Cube, right? Because again, like that movie is sort of so seminal and so like instrumental in establishing a lot of these like concept or premise films that I think it's just hard to talk about anything that's even vaguely similar without bringing it up.
But if you're looking for something different, those two films are different.
Yeah. I think they fit the bill for sure in terms of being things that are in fairly established and well-liked subgenres that people might not already be familiar with because of some other things that are in those genres perhaps being a bit more popular. So
check it out. Let us know in the comments.
Indeed. But speaking of established subgenres, let's talk about something a little controversial. Because we've talked a lot about video games on this show over the past many episodes, but we haven't ever really touched too much on video game controversy. We've talked about Grand Theft Auto and stuff like that, but I don't think we ever really framed it in that context. But one creation of Rockstar Games, which I think has definitely courted more controversy than any of their others, is something that you wanted to talk about this time around.
Yeah, the game is Manhunt, and actually, I kept it here from Marleton. There it is, from PlayStation 2.
Mm-hmm.
There's the cover. And I'd actually forgotten that it was part of the Rockstar sort of stable until I actually looked at it. And when it came out, it was like nothing else anyone had seen before. I guess it was the matter of fact violence of it that got everyone sort of worked up, because really the movies and games now have just as much violence and a lot more graphic, because of course PlayStation 2 the graphics aren't quite what they are today, but the whole idea behind it was, I guess, unsettling to a lot of people.
Well, I mean, the premise is fairly brutal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe explain to the people who aren't already familiar with it what the basic setup of this thing is.
Well, you have a character named Cash, who's a killer, and he's been convicted to death for the crimes he's committed. But they don't kill him; they just drug him, and they throw him into this scenario. It's like a closed-in city, kind of like maybe Escape from New York, say, or something.
Yeah, I always think of like the Running Man.
Yeah,
kind of like a little like cross between Escape from New York and the Running Man, maybe.
Yeah, and he comes to in this area, and he's contacted through, I guess it was an earpiece or something, a guy just known as the Director. And he's like, this is a situation. I've given you the opportunity to live, but you've got to go and kill all these people. And you have to sort of, I guess the whole key is to do it as stealthily as possible, because he's a lone person and everyone else seems to be in gangs and what have you there. So the Director sort of gives him hints on where to go, what to do. And so it starts. You play as this character Cash, and you hide in the shadows, and you come up, and the more brutal the kill, the more status and points you get. And so I guess the whole idea of, make it more brutal, you're rewarded for it. And I think that's what a lot of people got up in arms. And some of the deaths, I mean, the whole use of like a plastic bag, over the head and suffocating was kind of shocking to a lot of people too. And that's what it is. You use this character to go around and just kill people.
Murk people. Yeah.
So so you can get out of this hell that you found yourself in. And I mean, there's a story where, the Director has motives and he's going to do something, and then it spins into a sort of a different thing. But it's death and carnage is what it is.
If I recall correctly, the whole premise is that this is being filmed, isn't it? Isn't it sort of like it's like a TV show, or like being filmed for like people's entertainment, right? It's the other sort of like hook to the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Which of course, again, that premise has been well trod in other mediums, but like I think that was the first time you really saw it in the context of a video game.
Yeah.
As I recall.
Yeah. Because like in a movie like Death Race 2000, everyone, the society's watching. But I think because the Director, if I remember correctly, I think he did like snuff films and stuff like that. This guy. So I guess it was for private consumption, not broadcast to a society on a whole, like in some of the futuristic sci-fi movies. This one was nothing but darkness. It wasn't like there was anyone championing him on. So
I remember. So this is yet another one of those games that I know a lot about and have seen a lot about, but have never actually played. So it's one of those things though, where I remember when I saw it, I was like, I see what you're doing, Rockstar. I see it. I don't know that I want to participate in it, but I see it. I can see how there could be something worth experiencing in this, but I don't know that I'm interested in doing that.
Yeah.
And it's funny, right? Because, I just talked on the show previously about Hitman, which is a very similar premise in its own way. But I think one of the things that Hitman does a good job of is really giving you a lot of incentive to do what you're doing by showing you just how awful the people that you're taking out are.
Yeah.
and how like deserving of their fate they actually are. Not to say that actually justifies it, but I think that was another sort of thing that I thought about with respect to the Manhunt game, was like, am I going to be able to really get on board with this, like from a mental sort of emotional moral standpoint, which I think is one of the things that kind of steered me away from it. But I don't know, like knowing that there's all those sort of extra layers to it, I wouldn't be surprised if it would be an interesting gameplay experience. I just don't know if it would be something that I'd personally be super into or not.
It's well, I was reading up on it, and I heard that Xbox has made it backward compatible now, but I haven't gotten around to checking out to see if that's actually just rumor or was true. And it depended on if they jazzed up the graphics as well, or if they're just kept it sort of the same for that nostalgic feel. But don't get me wrong though, there's no one that's nice in this video. It's not like any of them deserve to live, because the ones that he's killing are all crazy people as well. So it's but it was fun, but it's been a while since I played it, obviously, with the PlayStation 2.
Right.
But I was looking through some of my stuff and I went, oh God, Manhunt. So that's my nostalgic pick for this month.
Yeah. Well, that game definitely spawned, a whole series of other games that were sort of like inspired by the fact that it went where it did with its premise. You had things like Mad World, and I know Sega did a game that had like a very similar premise, which I'll try to throw up on the screen if I can find it. But that basically would not have existed, had that game not come first and kind of broken the ice and kind of established that as like a viable, like valid premise for a game.
Yeah, well, even Grand Theft Auto by Rockstar, same kind of thing. It's just like you can just, if you want to be that person who just gets out and pull someone from a car and beat them to death and steal their car.
Yeah.
It's like, and there you're doing it to innocent people, just, citizens.
Well, and I think that's an important, or a kind of a critical distinction, right? With GTA, you make the choice oftentimes to do that or not, right? Whereas like, I think with Manhunt, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no alternative, right? There's no like thing you could do instead of what you're tasked with doing, right?
Yeah, you can't go, well, I decide not to. I'm just going to walk out, because if you do, you're just going to get killed. So it's
But I think that's like a really interesting premise, and actually that kind of leads us into the game that I was going to talk about, which does in fact provide that choice, which is a game called Postal 2. So for those of you unfamiliar with this series, as you might expect, it's about a guy who goes postal, or at least theoretically can go postal. But the thing that's particularly interesting about that second game, and why I would kind of put it head and shoulders above any of the other games in the series, is that they've made a really interesting design decision with that second one, which is that it's actually possible to play through that game without ever actually firing a shot or doing anything violent or crazy or like over the top or harmful. So like the basic premise of the game is that you're tasked with these very basic chores. It's like, go to the store and get milk, go to the bank and cash your paycheck, go to the library and return a book. Okay. And all of those things can be done in a fairly normal, mundane, undramatic fashion. Now, granted, there are things that happen in the course of you doing those things that might inspire you to take some sort of drastic action, might incentivize you to take some sort of drastic action. But at the end of the day, it's actually not necessary. The game's been designed in such a way where you don't actually have to do any of that. You can, and if you decide to go off the rails, if you decide to go quote unquote postal, you can do so in quite epic, over the top, insane fashion. But I think, to me, the thing that's super interesting about that game is the fact that you don't have to. And it really just becomes what you as the player choose to do in these situations that you've been presented with. And I think there's some very interesting thinking behind that.
Yeah. I was reading up a bit on it, and it sounded like an interesting premise. Watched a couple videos.
Nice. Yeah, I would definitely never say that it's like a masterpiece or like a must-play game or anything like that, but I feel like that aspect of it is something that I would really like to see reflected in more games. And I'd say, ironically, one of the only other games that I've seen that sort of thing done in nearly as effectively is actually another one of my favorite games, which is Metal Gear Solid 5. Because, you can do the complete like stealth playthrough of MGS5, right? Where like you basically never kill anybody, right? You trank them, or you Fulton them or whatever. And you can basically play through most of the entirety of that game without ever actually killing anybody. I think there's maybe a couple of scenes or a couple of like forced encounters where a death occurs in a cutscene or something like that, or like or you're in like a boss fight scenario where you just have no alternative but to murk somebody. But it's interesting to me for how big and complex and long that game is, how it also has that feature. So I always find it interesting. I'm sure there's a very short list of games that have any kind of real depth or like heft or sophistication to them that allow that level of player choice, where you can literally go from being like an insane killing machine all the way to a pacifist and like everything in between. So I always feel like it's interesting to call stuff like that out when you see it.
Yeah. Do you know when it came out roughly?
I believe I first played that game in the early 2000s. I believe it's a original Unreal Engine game. Is where like the sort of time frame of that lies up, and I think it was like right around the time period of like Unreal Tournament. So like early 2000s, I would say.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking about when I was looking at the videos and reading up on it, I was like, well, it was a very topical now because he can go out, as you said, and he can just go about his business, but he's coming across examples of post-COVID people now.
Yeah.
So it's the way everything seems to have gone upside down, and
it's really ingenious the way they constructed those scenarios, because it is they do such a good job of like putting you into a situation where you're like, I'm just getting annoyed. Like, these people are annoying. This situation is annoying. It's really starting to get under my skin. And you start to realize, as you're sitting there having that experience, this is how people flip, right? Like, this is how people, lose their marbles, and it's, I don't know. I wish that series had maintained its quality throughout, because it sadly, unfortunately, hasn't. I think it definitely peaked with that second game, for sure. But it is cool that second game does exist and is as cool and like thoughtfully designed as it is, because I think it's one of those things that shouldn't be forgotten or overlooked when you like look at the history of gaming, because I think like it is kind of especially as we move forward in time and it becomes more of an interesting fact that something like that existed as long ago as it did. I feel like it's more and more noteworthy as time passes.
Yeah.
Well, but yeah, so that would be my pick for sort of like a controversial, outside the box, video game experience. So I think between the two of those, you can probably get yourself into some trouble.
Exactly. Just don't tell your parents that we told you about them.
Yeah, those are both rated M for mature, for sure.
Play them on the sly.
Or do what you got to do, I guess.
There you go. Like the guy from Postal 2.
Yeah. You
make
be
your choice.
You be your own judge.
There you
How
go.
about that?
And jury and executioner.
Yes. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of executions, you had a TV show that you wanted to talk about this time around.
Yeah, it's The Last Kingdom. If you like Vikings, you like Saxons, you like the early pre-England, then this is a show that you'd probably be interested in. Because I was actually a big fan of the show Vikings, and this is actually just as good. It follows a character that was born Saxon, was the son of a king of a community in the burgeoning England, and his father dies, and through all sorts of skullduggery, his father's brother decides he wants to be the king and not let the son, the rightful heir. But through trials and tribulations, the boy ends up with a tribe of Vikings and is brought up with them, and he can't really go home because he'd be killed by his uncle. So he's lives with these the Vikings. He learns their ways and becomes a warrior among the Vikings, and then tragedy ensues yet again. He's a very unlucky fellow.
Yeah, for sure.
And then he makes his own way, and he becomes his own warrior for himself, warrior for hire, so to speak. And he comes across the most influential king in the land of England, and he decides he wants to get his rightful kingship from his original community back. Even though he's a Viking, he wants the money, the fame, everything. So he comes into contact with this one king of England who wants to link all of England, and becomes his basically right-hand man from like a warrior standpoint. And then it just sort of carries on with that, sort of the building of England, fighting against other Vikings, using his knowledge of Vikings to help defeat them. And he battles with the king himself, because he stays on sort of as a pagan, and the king is very Christian. So there's some things when you're like, come on, just give your head a shake. This guy's carrying you. What's the king? Why is he doing this? But I guess the whole belief system this King Alfred had was he was very devout Christian,
very rigid.
So it made him made some silly decisions, but a lot of action. It's always all flows really fast. Good acting, great sets, great cinematography. It's a captivating show if you like that type of
historical action adventure, political drama type stuff. I would say is what that falls into.
Yeah. So, have you had a chance to see it at all, or?
Yeah,
or
so I
even
checked out the
Vikings?
first episode, and definitely a
Yeah.
lot happens in that first episode, right? Because you
Yeah.
got a lot of time jumps and stuff like that, and basically goes from being a kid to being an adult, right? In the
Yeah.
span of that first episode. So
Yeah.
I appreciated that, though. I thought that was like a well done sort of primer, right, for what sort of the premise of the show is, and I could definitely see how it would go to some interesting places from there, for sure. And actually, I was kind of appreciative of the fact that they didn't really dwell on the backstory and the setup too much, especially given where it seems like the show is going to be heading in like future episodes. Because a lot of times shows will kind of try to drag that stuff out and really like build it up over maybe the course of like several episodes or a whole season even
Yeah.
before things really get rolling. So I kind of like the fact that it just, bam, from that first episode, you kind of know where things stand pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I think they had a good budget too, because some of those sort of the action scenes and where it was shot, it doesn't look like it was a cheap series to film.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they necessarily had like Game of Thrones or like Wheel of Time money or anything like that, but I mean,
No.
they definitely were, not playing around either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's based on a book by Bernard Cornwell or Cornwall.
Yeah, I'd seen that. Yeah.
And as a funny aside, I did notice there are some similarities. I've talked about this, I think, in previous episodes. I was sort of a fan a long time ago of the series Sharp, like Sharp rifles, all that based in the sort of Napoleonic Wars. And I do see a lot of similarities in the style, the way the story is written. And I was thinking, oh, it's kind of interesting. It's like, oh, Sharp was a big hit, my books and the movies. So it's just like, well, you take a character like that, and I'll just put him into a different historical time. So it's almost like a gimmick kind of thing. I was like, well, I have him during the Napoleonic Wars. I have him during the Saxon Viking Wars. I could have him in the whatever war you want or whatever time frame, and just have the same characters doing whatever. So because he'd do certain things, and I'd be like, well, that's just like what Sharp would do. He has this kind of his comrades that he kind of fights with, his loyal, Robin Hood's little band, and but
A little
I
bit
guess
of
if you have
if it ain't broke, don't fix it motif going on
exactly,
here, you're saying?
yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about it when you were talking about it, and I just thought, oh, that's right. It was written by Bernard, because there was a one scene which is funny because in Sharp, he always used to turn his head and look at the camera at the end of an episode. And it's kind of corny. And there was one where he does it at the end of one of the episodes in The Last Kingdom. And I was like, oh my God, just like Sharp.
Yeah,
It's kind of funny. But
Yeah.
this one, there's a lot of bloodletting in The Last Kingdom. But yeah, they did a good job with it. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's one thing I would say for sure from watching the pilot is if you're at all squeamish about, I don't know, beheadings or
Yeah.
or a lot of stabbity, you this may not be your jam. But I think if you're not bothered by that sort of thing, or if you can kind of get past it, I think there's some good acting and some good dialogue and some cool scenes and stuff like that, even in that first episode, that I think stood out and were noteworthy for sure. So I think there's like 4 or 5 seasons of that, right?
Yeah, it's like 5 seasons.
And I think if I'm not mistaken, there might be a film being made. I'm not sure if it's like
I did not know that.
a retelling of it or an extension of it or something like that. I thought I saw an article recently about that. But yeah, so there's quite a bit of content there to plow through if you do end up getting into it. So another good reason to mention it, I guess.
Yeah. So Last Kingdom, if you haven't got on board, do it today. Bing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good times. Well, speaking of kingdoms and the keys to the kingdom, which is actually an album by the musical artist we're going to talk about this time around. Although not the album we're going to talk about, because the album we're going to talk about is Long Distance Voyager by the Moody Blues. So this is one of my favorite bands, definitely in my top 3 or 5 for sure. And while this particular album is not necessarily my favorite of theirs, I thought it would be a good one to talk about because I think it sort of bridges the gap between the 2 different eras of this band. Because I think there's 2 different things that people tend to think about when they think about the Moody Blues. One is sort of like that classical music influenced, artsy, sort of experimental, avant-garde almost songwriting structure that they had in their early works. So through the late 60s and through like most of the 70s. And then they kind of did this really almost hard flip into very poppy, commercial, accessible music, like kind of heading into the 80s and throughout like the tail end of their career. And I think this particular album from 1981 sits in a really interesting place because it's sort of right at that juncture between those 2 eras of the band, and you really see both sides of who they were, like musically, sort of represented on it pretty effectively, I think.
It's kind of like Chicago, I guess.
I think, well, and like we talked
jazzy
about
at the beginning
previously on the show, like even Rush, like the way they transitioned through like different phases throughout their career and like, made the whole switch from progressive rock to like more accessible stuff. And I think like a lot of bands, especially bands who've been around for a long time, tend to go through those transformations or burn out, right?
Yeah.
Because I think to a certain extent, those sorts of evolutions are necessary to kind of keep things interesting and keep people engaged in the whole process of making music and touring it and all that sort of stuff, right? Like, who wants to be doing the exact same thing for 30 years straight?
Yeah. Well, I guess with the 80s too, they had that specific sound. It was like a sort of a big change, and computer-based stuff that you could do.
Synthesizers.
So bands like them
up
could
for a lot of bands.
do a lot more, so that they would be before. Do you have a preference? Do you like the earlier stuff or their or equally the same?
So I would say if I had to choose, like if I had to have one or the other and couldn't have both, I'd probably keep the earlier stuff. Not because I think there's anything inherently bad or wrong with the later stuff, but just because the earlier stuff was so influential and so like meaningful and so just unique, and really almost quintessential from a musical standpoint. Like, I mean, Days of Future Past, On the Threshold of a Dream, Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, Seven Soldier, and like those initial like 7 albums that they put out are so like iconic and huge from like a influence standpoint. Like, there's so many bands that were like really inspired by and like guided by them musically as a result of those albums. I mean, there's it's no surprise that those first albums are often referred to as like the Magnificent Seven by a lot of like music critics and other musicians and stuff like that, because they are such a big deal. So if I had to pick, I'd definitely go with the older stuff, but I am also very much a big fan of the later stuff as well. And again, like I said, I think Long Distance Voyager in particular is a really excellent album because of the way it kind of strides those 2 eras the way that it does.
Yeah. Well, Nights in White and Satin is a great song. That one but I probably know more of their newer stuff, like Your Wildest Dream, The Voice, Gemini Dream. They like Dream a lot. in their
Yeah, dreams are
songwriting.
definitely a big theme throughout their work. And as I said, On the Threshold of a Dream, which is probably actually my favorite album of theirs, is just a masterpiece when it comes to evocative imagery, both like sonically and lyrically and all that sort of thing. Like there's very few albums that I think could even approach like the sophistication and like just the epicness of that album in my mind. So they definitely had like a theme, right? They had an idea that they definitely stuck with and revisited and refined and improved upon in various ways throughout their career, which I always think is interesting because like when you look at the way they talk about things like life experiences and dreams and romantic relationships and stuff like that in the early stages of their career versus the middle of their career versus the end of their career, you can really see the evolution in how their thinking on those things changed and how the way they expressed their thoughts about those things changed in their songwriting. And I think that's another thing about bands that have been around forever, right? And have gone through all that growth and evolution and stuff, is you really get to see them revisit ideas and concepts and topics and get to see them grow kind of as you're growing as a person in parallel, which I think is another awesome thing about their stuff. But this particular album obviously has a lot of bangers on it, right? You have The Voice, you have Gemini Dream, you have Veteran Cosmic Rocker, just so many, 22,000 Days, so many just absolute banger songs on that album that like just stand out and are immediately recognizable. And even some of the more like avant-garde things like Painted Smile and Reflective Smile and all that sort of thing, like that harken back to that older style of music from the 70s, but still fit so nicely in with the other songs from that album. Again, just to me, that's like they're a must listen to group, and I think that album is a very good starting point, because wherever you decide to go from there, whether you go back to the past or into their future from that point, I think that's a good jumping off point to kind of explore their discography from.
Yeah, I'm not actually all that. I mean, I'm familiar with them and I've listened to them. I know some like their songs, but I don't know like so many other bands from that era, which is basically was my era. They weren't a band that really, I don't know, that I knew a lot about.
I think they kind of tended to fly a little bit more under the radar than most of their contemporaries, I would say. I think they're almost like the sort of hidden gem of that era in a lot of ways. Like as popular as they were, I think they definitely snuck by a lot of people, which is a shame because as I say, I feel like their music is exceptional. I don't think there's many bands that could actually step to them from like a musical craftsmanship standpoint.
So not to put you on the spot, but if you don't know, that's fine too. But it's like when I think of like Nights in White Satin, is that like super early in their career?
Yeah, that's the closer from Days of Future Past. So the thing about their first couple albums, Days of Future Past being their first like major label album from back in the late 60s, is that they were concept albums, right? And so the whole concept of Days of Future Past is it's literally a day in the life. So the first song on the album is called Dawn, right? And it's literally about like the sunrise and about like, waking up to like face a new day and like experience a new day. And then of course you have all of the other songs from that album are basically like the progression throughout the day. So you have like Tuesday Afternoon, which is another one of their more famous songs, right? Included on that album as part of that whole concept. And then of course Nights in White Satin is the closer, right? That's you're getting ready for bed, you're going to sleep, your day's over, right? And it's kind of bringing the whole thing home. And so like the crescendo of that song and where it sits in the context of that album and the way it kind of brings the whole concept of that album home is part of what makes it so amazing, right? Because as you say, it's a great song on its own, right? Like even if you just listen to it in isolation, it's an amazing song. But if you listen to it in the context of that whole album, it's even more amazing, because when you see how it makes good on everything that led up to it, it's like perfection.
Yeah. Well, it's an epic song. I mean, and it's lived on, over the years. It's not a song that faded away.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, that album is very interesting from a historical standpoint too, right? Because one of the first stereo recordings, one of the first full-length stereo recorded albums, also one of the first recorded with a live orchestra. Because they actually, their record label had the opportunity to record live with the London Symphony Orchestra, which is who's represented on that album. So I mean, all that stuff you're hearing was being done for the first time in the context of that project. So again, from a historical standpoint, like ultra meaningful and influential for sure.
It's funny. It's just to put myself on the spot and embarrass myself, but we always want to be honest on our show. When I think back with Knights in White Satin, I always thought it was about knights like on horseback.
A lot of people do.
And their outfit was there, because back then I didn't really listen to the words. I heard, but it was just the music, the sound kind of. Then it wasn't until you get older and you start listening to the meaning of the songs. But when they said it, I thought and the way they say it too, it just seemed like it was like knights in white satin, and they're going along, they're on a mission or something, and that's how I always interpret it. And it's
like all those people who think Elton John's singing "Hold Me Closer, Tony Danza."
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very common thing. You hear that a lot. You're not unique in that way, for sure.
So,
but and I think we've talked about this before on the show, like the whole idea of like, the more you listen to a song and the more you dive into the lyrics and the content of what they're actually getting at, and the metaphors that they're making and the things that they're referencing, like that's another thing about the Moody Blues, right? They were very astute in their lyrics in terms of like making literary references or making references to things that were happening in the world around them as the songs were being written. And when you kind of look at all this stuff that they did in that context, you really do get to experience that stuff on like a whole nother level, like the more you delve into it, because it works on one level on the surface, just taking it as it is, but then the more you peel back the layers and kind of really dig into it, those efforts tend to be rewarded because they did put so much thought into everything, which is like super cool.
Yeah, I have to go back and start listening to some of the early ones. So that's the beauty, but new technology, because now you can go onto like Spotify and I can click on the early albums and listen. It's not like the old days where you had to buy it and then go. Yeah, absolutely. That's not for me.
I mean, just the sheer amount of music discovery and exploration that can happen now so effortlessly is like truly amazing, right? Like you say, when we were kids, sitting there in a record store, right? Like trying to decide like, okay, what's the one album I'm going to buy and listen to for the next month or however long before I have enough money to buy another album, right?
Till my next allowance.
And I mean, there were some hard choices that got made back then, and you sometimes lived with some bad consequences from your choices for a very long time. But it's a whole different world now. I'm very envious of kids who get to come up nowadays. You can get just access to everything like at their fingertips like that. Although to flip it a little bit, I would say I also kind of sympathize with them a little bit, because what do you choose when you're presented with everything, right? Like like we had a little bit more of a filter back in the day, and there was a little bit more curation of things. Whereas like nowadays, it's just like, here's everything all at once, figure it out.
Yeah.
I guess that comes with its own problems and issues.
Yeah, they just follow whoever's got the biggest social media presence.
Don't do that, kids. Don't
Yeah.
do that. That's not the way to go.
Fine.
Ron's throwing out all sorts of bad ideas this episode.
Today's the bad episode. Bad idea episode.
It's all right. Good times. People will figure it out.
Yeah.
Believe me, if you're coming to us for like life advice, you may be barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah, you may have made a very bad decision.
Yeah.
But we're giving you lots of ideas.
Yes, lots of ideas. Do with them as you will.
Exactly. It's a learning experience.
Indeed.
With Michael and Ron.
Nice. See, I figured this would eventually end up being an educational podcast. It's just a question of time.
We'll be on PBS soon enough. Right after Lawrence Welk.
Tiny bubbles. Actually, those bubbles were huge, as I recall. They were very distracting when they were flying around the screen and stuff. Anyway, we probably don't need to go down the Lawrence Welk rabbit hole. Right,
that's another episode coming up. Stay tuned.
Yeah, we'll save that for a later date.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of a later date, that is when you will see us next time, because it's time to bring this bad boy to a close. Any parting thoughts or bad advice you'd like to share with the kids?
Don't eat yellow snow.
Solid.
But thank you for coming and spending some time with us. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe.
Now that is a good idea.
Always.
Congratulations. You just survived the Post-Mortem Report. For more information about the show, the hosts, or the things they talked about, check out our super swanky information page at anchor.fm/postmortemreport. Until next time, always remember, good posts never die.